My husband's coworkers think I'm his sister, and now I'm wondering what else he's hiding. My husband, I'll call him Josh, and I have been together for 6 years, married for 4, and we don't have kids. Our relationship has always been healthy and communicative. We're both pretty easygoing, and I really love him. Josh started working at a large accounting firm about 3 years ago, and from everything he's told me, he absolutely loves it there. He's made a lot of friends through his job, and he frequently goes out with them for drinks and other social events. I've always been completely fine with this. I'm quite introverted and have never been interested in meeting his coworkers or attending work events. I've got my own circle of friends, and I've always liked that we have separate social groups. But now that I think about it, I realize he's never actually asked me if I wanted to meet his colleagues or go to one of his work gatherings. I hadn't considered this odd before, but after what happened yesterday, it feels like important context. A few months ago, something happened that I brushed off at the time, but now it's resurfaced in my mind. I was at a bar with some friends for Friday after-work drinks when a guy approached me. He was there with his own group of friends, and though he seemed vaguely familiar, I was sure I hadn't met him before. He came up to me, friendly enough, and asked, "My name, right?" I was taken aback and probably gave him a confused look, so he followed up with, "I'm Jake. I work with Josh." That's when I realized I recognized him from a few photos on Josh's phone. I don't use social media much, just a private Instagram, so I wasn't sure if Josh had posted those photos anywhere, but we have a very trusting relationship, and I sometimes look through his photos. Don't judge me. Now, here's where things got weird. I'm socially awkward, so I didn't know how to end the conversation gracefully. Jake seemed a little tipsy, probably a few beers in, and just kept talking at me. I mostly nodded along until he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "It's great that you guys are still so close. I haven't talked to my brother in ages." At the time, when Jake referred to me as Josh's sister, I was taken aback but didn't think too deeply about it. I assumed he was drunk and just misspoke, so I brushed it off. He started to get a little flirty, and that was my cue to turn to my friends and leave. I didn't say anything to my friends about it, and I didn't think it was worth mentioning to Josh either. It wasn't that I wanted to hide it from him. I just figured Jake wouldn't even remember talking to me. Plus, I didn't want to make things awkward for Josh at work by telling him one of his colleagues had hit on me. At the time, it felt like a harmless encounter. No harm, no foul. But then, yesterday morning, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I was out walking our dog, Monty. He's a mix of a few breeds and has unique markings that make him pretty memorable. This detail will matter, I promise. On our walk, I decided to stop by my regular cafe in town to grab a coffee. While I was standing in line, Monty, being the friendly, happy pup he is, caught the attention of the man in front of me. The man, who was older, had just picked up his coffee. As he turned around, he stopped, his face lighting up as he exclaimed, "Hello, Monty." Monty, who seemed thrilled to see him, wagged his tail furiously. It was clear they'd met before, and I guessed that the man must be one of Josh's colleagues. Josh occasionally takes Monty to the office, and I've always thought it was cute that his coworkers seemed to enjoy having the dog around. I smiled, thinking it was sweet that Monty had made another friend at Josh's office. The man introduced himself, confirming that he worked with Josh, but then he said something that completely threw me off. "Aren't you a good sister, walking his dog for him?" I froze. The word sister rang in my ears, and I could barely process what he had just said. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard him. Before I could think of a proper response, the words stumbled out of my mouth. "It's my dog." I immediately regretted how awkward that sounded. I should have corrected him and said, "I'm Josh's wife," but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. The moment felt too bizarre, and I didn't want to escalate things or make them more uncomfortable. The man didn't seem to notice my hesitation. Instead, he casually asked me something about sharing a dog, but thankfully, I was next in line to order my coffee. I used the opportunity to escape the conversation. As I waited for my coffee, my mind was racing. I felt a growing sense of unease as I replayed the encounter in my head. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Jake's comment at the bar about being close suddenly came flooding back, and for the first time, I started piecing together what might actually be happening. Why would two of Josh's coworkers think I was his sister? I'm at a loss for what to do. What would you guys do in this situation? It's so bizarre and embarrassing that I've only told one friend about it so far. She's my ride or die, and true to form, her immediate reaction was, Time to plot his downfall. I love her for having my back, but I don't want to jump to conclusions or assume the worst. I don't want to ruin my marriage over something that could be nothing. At the same time, this feels too strange to ignore. I'd really appreciate any and all advice, especially if someone has been through something similar or has an idea of how to approach this without making it worse. I've seen a lot of people suggesting that I must have severe social anxiety or crippling introversion based on how I describe these events. I get it. Maybe the way I explained things made it sound that way, but I promise that's not the case. Yes, I said I'm introverted, but that just means I'm not someone who jumps at the chance to meet large groups of new people. The idea of being surrounded by a bunch of finance brothers, chugging beers at a sports bar and mansplaining everything to me until my ears bleed, doesn't sound like my idea of fun. Okay, maybe that's a negative stereotype, but I'm sure some of you know what I mean. That said, I'm not afraid of confrontation. I describe myself as more laid back and confrontation-averse rather than terrified of it. I prefer to keep things easy and positive, and I'd rather avoid awkward moments, like having to correct someone when they misrecognize me. It's not that I can't stand up for myself. It's just that in the moment, it felt easier to let it go and move on. Another thing I probably didn't explain well is that my husband and I aren't living completely separate social lives. We do have mutual friends, and when we're with them, Josh acts completely normal, affectionate, loving, and like the great husband I've always known him to be. It's only his work friends that I've never met. I haven't been to his office parties, team dinners, or happy hour events, and he's never suggested that I should. Until recently, I didn't think much of it. I just assumed it was because I never expressed interest in tagging along. But now, I can't help but wonder if there's a reason he's kept me separate from that part of his life. Why would his work friends think I'm his sister? And more importantly, why hasn't Josh ever mentioned this to me? I've read through a lot of the advice and reactions people have shared, and while I'm grateful for the support, I feel like I need to address a few things. Some people are comparing this situation to something as extreme as physical abuse, saying that I'm foolish for not immediately leaving my husband. Others are claiming that I'm stupid for thinking my relationship was healthy when it clearly isn't. To that, I just want to say, please cut me some slack. This is a deeply personal and confusing experience for me. I'm not perfect, and I'm trying to navigate something that feels entirely alien and bizarre. My initial reaction wasn't to jump to the worst possible conclusion, because that's just not who I am. I care about my marriage, and I've always believed in our relationship. That said, I've come to realize, thanks in part to the feedback I've received, that this is a much bigger deal than I initially thought. I think I needed that external confirmation to really see the weight of what's going on. I'm going to talk to Josh today. I can't let this fester any longer. I need to ask him directly why he's been telling his coworkers that I'm his sister. To prepare, I've followed some advice from this thread and written down the key points I want to address. That way, if I get emotional or overwhelmed, I'll have a clear guide to keep me focused. Here's what I plan to say. Bring up the specific instances. I'll remind him of Jake's comment at the bar and the older colleague's remark about me walking his dog. Ask for an explanation. Why did they think I was his sister? Was it a misunderstanding? Or has he been lying? Demand clarity. If it's true that he's been misrepresenting me, I want to know why. I'm not going to let him sidestep the issue. If this is all some kind of mix-up, I'll give him the chance to prove it. But if it's not, if he's been intentionally lying, I need to know what's going on and why he's been keeping me separate from his work life. I know this might not sound like the dramatic, theatrical confrontation some of you were hoping for, but this is my life, not a reality show. Today is Saturday, and I can't wait any longer to get answers. Wish me luck. I'll update if anything major happens, but for now, thank you all for your advice and support. It's given me the clarity I needed to approach this head-on. Update. On Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than my husband. Josh was extremely hungover and sleeping like a rock. I decided to follow some advice I received and take a proper look through his phone while he was asleep. I've used his phone so many times before, just messing around on it, that it had never even crossed my mind to check anything more deeply. I know his passcode by heart, so it wasn't difficult to get in. I started by looking at the obvious apps, Instagram DMs, Facebook Messenger, and iMessages. I went through everything carefully, but I didn't find anything that raised any red flags. Still, I remembered comments about how people who cheat can be good at hiding their tracks, so I kept searching. While scrolling through his apps, I noticed a folder labeled Work. Inside, There were a few Microsoft apps like Outlook, Authenticator, and OneNote, but what caught my eye was Microsoft Teams. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. It felt invasive to look through his work messages, almost like I was breaking some kind of law. But after everything that had been happening, I felt justified in my actions. When I opened the app, I saw several one-on-one chats with his coworkers. Many of them were with female colleagues, which, at first, didn't seem unusual. It's normal to communicate with people of the opposite gender for work. However, as I started reading through the messages, a few of the chats stood out. There were playful exchanges, some with innuendos or even wink emojis. For example, one coworker joked about Josh being a hero for fixing something at work, and he replied with a winking face and a comment that felt slightly too personal for a professional conversation. I want to be clear. I didn't find any evidence of an outright affair. There was nothing about meeting up outside of work or anything overtly inappropriate. But the tone of some of the messages upset me. It felt disrespectful, like he didn't see a problem with engaging in light flirting with coworkers. Even if it wasn't serious, it still hurt. Following advice I'd read, I decided to take screenshots of the messages that bothered me. I airdropped them to my phone to make sure I had evidence in case I needed to confront him or seek an outside opinion. Once I was done, I put the phone back where I found it and sat down to collect myself. My emotions were all over the place. Anger, confusion, sadness. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep brushing this off. Even after everything I'd found, I still needed concrete proof. Something undeniable that showed Josh had directly told someone I was his sister. A commenter had suggested searching for keywords like sister or sis in his messages, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. To whoever suggested that, thank you. I wanted to reply to your comment, but the post had been locked. Just know I appreciate it. I opened MS Teams again and used the search bar, typing in sis to cover both sister and sis. At first, the search results were harmless. There were messages from coworkers in group chats talking about their own sisters or unrelated topics. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, my heart dropped when I saw a direct message from Jake, the guy I'd met at the bar, to Josh. It was from a Monday a few months ago, shortly after that awkward encounter. Jake had messaged Josh, "Ran into your sis at the bar on Friday. She's single, right?" And Josh had the audacity to reply, "Nah, she's married." I swear, I nearly burst into flames on the spot. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the phone. First of all, I was furious with myself for not confronting Josh about this sooner. If I'd brought up meeting Jake months ago, everything might have come to light back then. The fact that Josh had probably been counting on me to either forget about it or never mention it made my blood boil. He must have thought he was so clever for getting away with it. But what truly enraged me was the sheer hypocrisy. Josh had the nerve to lie and tell Jake that I was the one who was married, just to keep other men from showing interest in me. Meanwhile, he was casually flirting with women in the office like it was no big deal. I could practically feel the heat radiating off me as I thought about it. The arrogance, the double standards. It was almost too much to process. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a small issue. This was calculated deception, and it painted a picture of someone who was perfectly fine keeping me in the dark while crafting an entirely different narrative about our relationship at work. I couldn't stop at just that one message from Jake. I kept going through the search results on Josh's MS Teams, determined to uncover the full truth. Eventually, I made my way back to messages from about 2 years ago. That's when I found another message, this time from Josh himself. It was in a group chat, and it read, "Me and Sis in Nusa Dua." Alongside the message, he had attached a series of photos from our trip to Bali. We went there for our second anniversary, and I remember how much fun we had. The photos he chose were of the two of us on the beach, and I couldn't help but notice that he was shirtless in most of them. Knowing Josh, he probably picked those because he'd been working out and thought he looked good. Seeing that message broke me. I was in tears as I scrolled through the pictures, images of what I thought were happy memories now tainted by his lie. He had shared these personal moments with his coworkers while pretending I was his sister. I took screenshots of those messages and photos too and airdropped them to my phone, adding to the growing collection of evidence. By the time I finished going through his messages, I was devastated. My emotions were all over the place. Shock, sadness, anger, and I couldn't even begin to process it all. I needed space to think, so I grabbed my keys and drove to my best friend's house. Let's call her Sophie. When I arrived, I immediately broke down and showed her everything I'd found. Sophie is my ride or die, and she was livid, probably even angrier than I was. She hugged me, let me cry it out, and reassured me that I wasn't crazy or overreacting. Around 1:30 p.m., I got a call from Josh. I couldn't bring myself to answer, so I hung up immediately. Then the messages started coming. Where are you, baby? I'm ordering food. Want some? Sad to not wake up next to you this morning, sad face. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. I have to emphasize how much I loved this man. Seeing him act like nothing was wrong, still being sweet, still pretending we were the perfect couple, was absolutely heart-wrenching. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to run home, pretend none of this had ever happened, and let things go back to normal. I know some people might accuse me of being too scared to confront him right away, but that's not true. Please try to understand. I needed time to process everything. My emotions were so raw that I wouldn't have been able to form a coherent sentence if I tried to talk to him right then and there. Sophie was a lifesaver. She ordered us Chinese takeout, poured me a glass of wine, and helped me come up with a plan for how to confront Josh. She reminded me that I didn't need to rush into anything, that it was okay to take the time I needed to collect myself. As the evening went on, Josh kept texting and calling. I eventually put my phone on Do Not Disturb, so I could have some peace. On Sunday morning, I woke up feeling more angry than sad. The devastation I felt on Saturday had given way to pure rage, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I picked up my phone and replied to Josh's messages with one simple line. Coming home now, need to talk? I kept it cryptic on purpose. I wanted him to squirm. When I got home, Josh immediately tried to hug me, but I stepped back and refused. We ended up standing in the kitchen, the tension between us palpable. Without wasting any time, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Why have you been telling your co-workers I'm your sister? I wish I could say the color drained from his face, or that he looked like a deer caught in headlights. That's what I had hoped for, a clear sign of guilt or panic. But instead, he just frowned and said, huh. That one word, huh, ignited my anger all over again. Don't play dumb. I snapped. 2 of your co-workers have greeted me as your sister, and I have proof of you telling them that. I also know you're pretending to be single. What do you have to say for yourself? I was practically shaking as I laid it all out. I expected him to come clean, to explain himself, maybe even apologize. But instead, he doubled down. Josh's expression shifted to mild defensiveness, and he repeated over and over, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would I lie about you? It was infuriating. I couldn't believe he was trying to gaslight me after everything I'd uncovered. My anger boiled over, and I felt tears streaming down my face. I always cry when I'm furious, which only made him treat me like I was being irrational. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of his me and sis message from MS Teams. I shoved it toward him and said, you tell me. But instead of owning up to it, he just stared at the screen and shrugged. I don't know what I'm looking at, he said. I'm confused. His complete refusal to acknowledge what was right in front of him left me speechless. At that moment, I realized that he wasn't going to admit to anything, no matter how much evidence I had. His defensiveness and feigned confusion were his way of avoiding responsibility, and it made me angrier than I've ever been in my life. I was so furious, I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The way Josh kept pretending to be confused, refusing to admit anything, felt like running into a brick wall. My anger kept building, and I knew if I stayed, I would only get more upset. So, I left again. I went straight back to Sophie's house. As I was leaving, Josh became visibly upset. He was in tears, pleading with me not to go. To me, his reaction was proof that he knew he was lying and that he was starting to panic. He must have realized he couldn't keep this act up forever and would eventually need to come up with an explanation. He tried to stop me, asking me to stay and talk, but I refused. I told him, until you have something to say for yourself, we've got nothing to talk about. And with that, I walked out the door. Around 8:30 p.m., Josh called me again. This time, he asked if we could talk because he had things to say. Reluctantly, I agreed and went back to our apartment. When I arrived, I found him sitting on the couch with a piece of paper in his hands. It looked like he'd written out a speech, and he asked me to let him explain without interrupting. I sat down and listened as he read through his notes. Here's the gist of what he said. He started by apologizing profusely. He admitted that earlier, when I confronted him, he pretended to be confused because he panicked and didn't know what to say. He explained that when he first started at his job, he quickly realized the work environment was like a frat house. Most of his team members were men in their 20s and 30s who were single and, as he put it, fuckboys. He noticed that the one married guy on the team was often teased or excluded from social activities like lunches, inside jokes, and Friday night outings. Feeling desperate to fit in and avoid being treated like an outsider, Josh initially just avoided mentioning that he was married. He claimed he still wore his wedding ring, but no one ever asked about it. Then, a few months in, during a night out with his coworkers, one of them saw a picture of me on his phone lock screen. When they asked who I was, Josh panicked and blurted out, "My sister." Josh admitted that after his initial lie, things quickly spiraled out of control. His coworkers kept bringing me up, grilling him for more details, and asking to see additional pictures. He felt trapped and said he didn't have the balls to admit the truth. The jokes about me got worse over time. His coworkers would ask things like, "Did you give her my number yet?" or make crude comments about having slept with me. Josh claimed he hated these remarks but didn't know how to stop them. When Jake messaged him after seeing me at the bar, Josh assumed it was just more teasing. That's why he told Jake I was married, hoping it would shut down the jokes, though he admitted it didn't help. He also revealed that this wasn't the first time he'd mentioned I was married. He said it almost immediately after calling me his sister, thinking it might mitigate the situation. Josh admitted that the only pictures he had intentionally sent to his coworkers were the ones from our trip to Nusa Dua. He said he did so after constant pestering from his colleagues, who kept asking to see photos from his holiday. He expressed deep shame for deliberately lying about those pictures and said he regretted giving in to their pressure. He also insisted that he had never had an affair or even considered one. The messages with his female colleagues, according to him, were just casual banter, a tone he claimed was common in their office environment. Still, he admitted that he felt embarrassed and disappointed in himself for participating in such behavior, acknowledging that it was inappropriate and disrespectful. Josh ended his explanation with another heartfelt apology. He admitted that he was disgusted with himself and deeply ashamed for maintaining the lie for so long. He said he felt trapped by his own deception and couldn't figure out how to come clean without making everything worse. He acknowledged that he could have confessed the truth at any time, either to me or his coworkers, but he didn't, because, in his own words, he was too much of a coward. To try to make amends, he offered to confess to his entire office, admitting that he lied and that I'm his wife, not his sister. Quit his job immediately, without any explanation, if that's what I wanted. Finally, he said that he hoped I could forgive him, but he would understand if I couldn't. I still don't know if I can fully trust what Josh said. A lie that extreme, carried on for so long, is hard to wrap my head around. If he could lie about this, what else might he be hiding? At the same time, his explanation and apologies felt sincere. Knowing him, I can't believe he's someone who's easily influenced by peer pressure, especially in social settings with other men. Still, the entire situation strikes me as a shocking display of immaturity. I know I need time to process everything before deciding on my next steps. Right now, I can't say whether I'm leaning toward forgiveness or divorce. Those seem like the only two options, but neither feels clear. At the moment, I feel lost, like I'm stuck in a void. It's hard to describe it as anything other than emptiness.